Josh Pate said on his show, he was naming sleeper teams for different conferences, and he named Tennessee as a, quote, big time sleeper team in the SEC. They are his sleeper team in the SEC. He said exactly what we've been saying, which is Nico Iamaleava is going to be a star. Quote, I love the moves they've made in the wide receiver room. Their talent is underrated. So is, and this is big, Dave, this is what me and you talk about, the most sleeper part of Tennessee. He gets it. So is their defensive coaching staff. Yes, Tennessee has the most underrated defensive coaching staff in college football, and people don't realize it because their defense has struggled. And he points out that they get Florida and Alabama at home. They go to Georgia late in the year, but they can be right in the thick of the race at that point, and they could afford to lose that game. Here's what this all boils down to. Tennessee is a sleeper team, but they shouldn't be a sleeper team because they shouldn't be catching anybody off guard. Dave, I'm missing something. They were 11-2 and finished number 6 in 2022. They had a drop off that last year with a clear downgrade at quarterback, and only dropped 2 more games, went 9-4. They have what everybody believes is an upgrade at quarterback this year, and actually an easier schedule. I'm missing something about why they should be considered a sleeper team at all, and not just a legitimate national title threat.
Better than that, Caleb.
Nope.
You know why this team is considered a sleeper team. There are 2 reasons. Do you want to guess for one? Because I'll give you the 2. There are 2 main reasons, and it's brought to you by our friend Rick Terry Jewelry Design. They want to be your jeweler looking for affordable game day jewelry. How about the Fire Opals, a Tennessee tradition? RickTerryJewelry.com. RickTerryJewelry.com. It's still viewed as a gimmick offense because people haven't seen it enough on their television to realize that it is a running football team. And this defensive backfield has looked really bad. So those are the 2 things that they pulled away from the 2022 season that was so special. It was that that Hendon Hooker was throwing the ball all around in the Alabama game, which is the game they saw. And then the quarterback gets hurt in South Carolina. So, it must just be a passing football team. I'm just telling you what media sees. They do not see all of every game, and they are wrong a lot. I would be wrong a lot, Caleb, if I started talking about Oregon State. And I know a little bit about Oregon State, but I could get in pretty dangerous territory. And a lot of these people did. And then you have a guy that seems like he could just step in and fit the mold. And Tennessee's offense took a step back. You and I believe, and I don't want to rip anybody on the message board and that start to be a thing again, that came down to one person. If we're right, Tennessee is going to be the cat's pajamas once again. If we're not right, then Hendon Hooker was special, Jalen Hyatt was special, and the offense is kind of special. But I think they're going to be really good at the quarterback position. That's where I stand.
I think so too. And you are right about that. And I actually got more of a vibe from this from NFL analysts than anything. I will never forget Mel Kiper being low on Hendon Hooker, being down on Hendon Hooker, because he came out and he said, it's obvious that it's Josh Heupel's offense and quarterbacks are the product because Joe Milton played just as well as Hendon Hooker did in the bowl game. Anybody that watched the Orange Bowl and watched Hendon Hooker throughout the year knows that Joe Milton did not play as well as Hendon Hooker did in that game. Okay, Joe Milton did have a pleasantly surprising bowl game. He did not play as well as Hendon Hooker had played in some of his best games that year. He didn't consistently move the ball. It was a lazy take. But for people that actually do their... Here's what we're saying here. Let's call it what it is, Dave. Sleeper team is code for teams that national media haven't done their proper research on. That's what that means. Now, I've not done my proper research on some teams, so I get it. If you are a national analyst, you can't get everybody. But like, I've always said this.
It's still May. You're doing a great job. It's still May. Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. The reason I'm bringing that all up is just a perfect example. The 98 team. I have argued for years that one of the laziest takes was that 98 team was some pleasant surprise team that, they came from out of nowhere. If anybody had actually studied the roster, they would have known that even though Peyton Manning left, even though Leonard Little left, even though Marcus Nash left, if people had actually studied the roster, they'd have realized that team was loaded with talent. Loaded with talent.
I might differ just a little bit because I didn't know Peerless Price was that good. I thought the receivers would take a step back. I didn't know who there with Terry Fair gone. I didn't know who their stopper was going to be in corner, but I don't want to get too.
But that 97 recruiting class was arguably the best recruiting class that Fulmer ever had, and they were all about to step in as starters in 98 because they had developed now for a year. So they were just loaded with new talent. I mean, we can talk Jamal Lewis. The biggest story of 98 was the offensive line was very young in 97, and most of them were back in 98, and that was the biggest improvement. So I'm just saying there was a level of research that needed to be done. And I call myself guilty on this. You did your research on it. I didn't, Dave. I didn't do my research on Michigan this past year. For those who don't remember, I had Ohio State winning the national title going into last year because I looked at most first-round picks in mock drafts, and Ohio State led the way. The problem with that is that I didn't look at who had the most NFL potential picks all the way through their roster 1 through 7 rounds, and I didn't look at the depth and the experience. And also didn't factor in coaching as much. Jim Harbaugh's a significantly better coach than Ryan Day, and that's why Michigan won the national title. And you called Michigan, Dave, in September, didn't you? You called Michigan the minute you watched them in September.
And you know why? It's because I thought they looked like a semi-pro NFL team.
They were mature.
That quick. It took less than a quarter. And I was like, well, unless I see somebody, I might see somebody way, way faster. That does happen still in college, where if you just got speed all over the field, you could still negate that, but they had enough speed. Now, Meat Drinker, he says, sometimes I wonder Hookerman and Caleb better have a good explanation or I'm going to be bleep poor disappointed in them. Here's what Caleb said, that when he said it, he was crazy. And he turned out to be right. I would rather have a guy that is top 15, and I never thought I would say this, in high school football recruiting, and top 10, or maybe can I get a top 8 or top 10 in the transfer portal? Because I feel like if you recruit top 15, you've got your base, your guys that you want to win over. You don't have to make concessions, because 2 reasons you make concessions to keep a guy on a team. You don't have to do it anymore. Billy Bob's a great kid, but he's not good enough athletically. You put your arm around Billy Bob. Sorry, I can call Tennessee Wesleyan, or I can call this school or ETSU, and I can get you a place, and we're going to get you a place, and you can always come back here and get your degree. Okay, Billy Bob, sorry. It's good to see you. That's pretty easy. And the other one is if they can't handle it academically, you're able to help them out. That's pretty easy too, because they don't want that to come out. So I want that guy. I want that. I mean, look who he's got. Brew McCoy was so coveted that now you go into the season thinking he is one of the key players despite coming off a major injury. That is top 5 type of transfer portal stuff. That's going to Atlanta and getting an Eric Berry as far as high school recruiting and that type of big pickup. So yes, I'd rather be top 10 to 15-ish in both than to be just elite in one. And I think that's why Nick Saban said, hey, you're adding a whole new side to my playlist here, and I don't want any part of this.
Yeah, it's actually why 247 Sports, the most valuable commodity now in 247 Sports, is talent composite rankings that they do every year based on just who you picked up in the transfer portal and in recruiting. I wish there was a way to do, and what I think should be done is, and I'm putting it out there because I'm not going to do it because I'm not psychotic enough and don't have enough time to do it. Somebody do a computer simulation of talent composite rankings with experience. And you might then have it's similar to SP Plus, but not exactly like SP Plus. And you might actually have one of the most effective measurements of who the best teams are. Because I'm telling you, the underrated part is not just the recruiting rankings, not just the transfer portal rankings, but how well these guys have played together for a period of time.
I'm just gonna say this, and Green Wave, I don't want to get in an argument with you about how much stealing signs helped, because surely it didn't hurt. But I'd rather play with men than steal signs. And they were playing with men last year that stayed around an extra year longer when they could have gone to the NFL. The same thing that Cooper Mays, John Campbell Jr., same thing they're doing. A couple of guys on the defensive line I could name as well. A couple of guys can't even stay on at Louisville. Apparently, they shouldn't have left in the first place. Now, the thing that needs to be pointed to is, if I'm so high on Michigan, Dave, why can't you bring up their sign stealing? And you're very right, and that's very fair. But I've been around coaches long enough that I know signs change week to week. So I have a question of how much it helped teams that they didn't play on an annual basis, Caleb. That would be my thought process on that. And the other thing is, I do believe that play calling is the most overrated aspect of sport. I'd rather have a good game plan where my guys step to the line, boom, they know to change a play because they're looking around. They're like, this was a bad play call. I think play calling is way overrated, but that's another story.
Not only is play calling overrated, sign stealing is massively overrated, because every team, I know this much, every team has 2 or 3 sets of signs that they do to keep things mixed up. So if you thought Michigan was onto your signs and you didn't change it up in the middle of the game, that's on you. That's totally on you, because you could have caught them off guard totally if you did that. Another point is...
Now we would both agree with Green Wave, because I'm not trying to upset him. He's a great poster. But we both agree with this dastardly, and you wouldn't want your guy to do it, right? No matter who you root for, right?
Yes, but it's the other layer of this is that the reason I had trouble with the sign stealing scandal last year is so many other Big Ten schools knew about it. If you know the whole sign stealing advantage you get goes out the window if the other team knows you've stolen their signs, right? Because you can just switch your signs up on them. And last year, by the way, Michigan clearly wasn't doing that. Jim Harbaugh was suspended for 3 games for it. They weren't going to be able to get away with this because they were going to be under a microscope when they played Ohio State last year, and they beat Ohio State last year. And I thought that was Ohio State's most talented team under Ryan Day, and they still won. So, you know, and you don't think if this was a thing that Ryan Day and then Nick Saban and the college football playoff would have taken these things into account? Of course they would have. And they still got beat. They got beat because Michigan didn't steal the sign that caused Alabama's center to miss to have how many poor snaps in the Rose Bowl game? That had nothing to do with Michigan sign stealing. That had to do with Michigan was fully disciplined, and Alabama, because they had so much attrition with Saban's focus on recruiting, was not. It was literally that simple. And this is where what we talked about, Tennessee has such an advantage this year. They're going to be so disciplined. They have such a rapport. The only question becomes if Nico gets on the same page with his receivers, because Nico is a first-year starter. I actually think that's, funny enough, the easiest part of the Heupel offense, Dave, is the quarterback getting on the same page with the receivers.
Let's talk Michigan for 1 second. So I'm going to reset the poll question. Would you rather cheat by sign stealing or overpaying to keep players around? We don't know that they overpaid, but they did bend over backwards to keep a lot of players in-house.
So what's more valuable, stealing signs or paying to retain talent?